On October 13th, 2025, the universe blinked. Not once, not twice, but in a rhythm older than speech itself. 5, 8, 13. Numbers that grow like shells, like storms, like life. And for the first time, light itself seemed to count along. Behind the sun, an object no one fully understood. 3 Atlas, pulsed in perfect Fibonacci sequence, then vanished into silence. NASA called it noise. Others called it proof. But between those two words lies the oldest question of all. When the cosmos speaks, would we even recognize the voice? This is the story of what happened when science met myth, when data became prayer, and when, for one brief moment, the universe may have whispered back. Chapter 1, The False, October 13th. On the 13th day of October 2020, 108 years to the day since the miracle of Fatima, the sun burned with an indifferent brilliance while, somewhere behind it, an object not born of this system may have whispered in numbers. The signal was brief, almost imperceptible. 5, 8, 13. 3 pulses of light separated by intervals that, when measured, matched the Fibonacci progression with unsettling precision. To most instruments it was noise, a glitch in telemetry, a reflection off the solar wind. But to a few, who have spent their lives listening for the improbable, it was a moment when mathematics spoke back. The object was already an anomaly before that night. 3i Atlas, catalogued as the third, confirmed interstellar visitor after Oumuamua and Borisov, traveled a retrograde path, inclined 5 degrees off the ecliptic, its tail pointing not away from the sun, but perversely toward it. Its albedo fluctuated beyond expected limits, and its rotation period, 16.16 hours, converted into 969.6 minutes, the same number that Scripture assigns to Methuselah, the oldest of men. Coincidence, perhaps. Yet the cosmos, in its vast indifference, rarely repeats human myths by accident. As the reports circulated, another coincidence surfaced. The Solar Dynamics Observatory's live feed had gone dark that same day for scheduled maintenance. The high-rise camera aboard the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter had been offline since October 1st. The best eyes we had to see anything passing near the sun had blinked. For a world saturated with surveillance, the timing felt like a cosmic curtain call. David Sarita, whose work sits at the intersection of physics and mysticism, was the first to claim that the pulses were intentional. He called them a mathematical handshake, a way of saying, "We know your language." In his model of the hyperdimensional solar system, numbers aren't merely quantities, but coordinates in a geometry of consciousness. 5, he says, marks Earth, the 5th harmonic from the central resonance he places at 591 days. 8 corresponds to the dominions, a hypothetical orbit between Mars and Jupiter. 13 is the outer ring of virtues, the limit of the inner solar choir. Whether you believe him or not, the elegance is undeniable, a sequence that binds mathematics, myth, and motion into a single phrase. It is the same sequence that governs the arrangement of leaves, the spiral of shells, the architecture of galaxies. To encode it in light is to speak in the universal tongue. For some, that was precisely the problem. If the signal were real, It meant we were being addressed in a language that predates speech. If it were fabricated, it meant someone on Earth understood exactly how to touch the collective nerve of wonder and fear. Either way, humanity had been spoken to. Within hours, forums lit up with threads entitled Fibonacci from the Sun and Fatima Redux. Images of overexposed SDO frames circulated as evidence of hidden patterns. Skeptics dismissed them as JPEG artifacts. Believers called them glyphs. Meanwhile, mainstream outlets maintained a peculiar quiet, not a denial, not a confirmation, just absence. The few statements NASA released were carefully worded. No anomalous activity detected. Instrumentation under review. What they did not release were the raw data files from the observatories that had detected the fluctuations in the first place. To many, silence became its own form of speech. By the second night, independent astronomers from Chile to Japan reported irregularities in the background luminosity of the inner corona, a faint pattern of oscillation that seemed to mirror the original three-pulse sequence. None of them could replicate it with certainty, but the timing was too neat to ignore. It was as if something on the far side of the sun had tapped the stellar surface like a drum, sending ripples through the heliosphere. And somewhere in those ripples, humans heard music. Sarita published his analysis on a private channel he called The Golden Field. The paper was dense with ratios and resonances, references to Dante's Paradiso, and Kepler's Harmonisches Mundi. He noted that dividing 591 by the golden ratio, equals 1.68, yielded Earth's orbital period to 4 decimal places. He overlaid Dante's 9 celestial spheres onto planetary orbits and found a mirror fit within 1%. Coincidence after coincidence, each folded into the next like nested mandalas. When he applied the same proportions to the rotation curve of 3E Atlas, the numbers again aligned. To him, the message was clear. The object was not random. It was harmonic. To his critics, it was mathematical pareidolia, seeing faces in clouds. But even they admitted the coincidences were stacking too neatly. Outside academic circles, a different conversation took shape. Richard C. Hoagland, a veteran of NASA's Apollo communications team and longtime advocate of hyperdimensional physics, argued that the number 108 itself was the key. 108 years since Fatima, 108 as the spiritual temperature at which life ends, 108 as the angle between Earth and Moon in sacred geometry, 108 2 equal 216, and 216 odd 2 equals 432, the frequency some call the natural tuning of the universe. He proposed that 3I Atlas was timed or composed to resonate with that harmonic, like a note struck across centuries. It was a theory equal parts music and madness, and it spread fast. For those hungry for pattern and chaos, it was a feast. As the nights passed, the story mutated. Some said the pulses were coming from a probe hidden within the comet's core. Others believed they were merely statistical noise from solar storms. Between the two extremes lay a narrow band of possibility, a space where the data were real, but their meaning undecided. That was the band humanity always occupies, halfway between proof and belief. In that liminal space, Sarita offered a parable. He wrote, "Suppose a civilization wished to announce its existence without violence, without words. What better way than to illuminate the sun in a sequence of numbers we already carry in our DNA? For him, the Fibonacci pattern was not just mathematics, it was biological memory. Spirals of shells, curves of galaxies, the architecture of the cochlea all follow the same ratio. To speak it in light was to speak directly to life itself. Still, the simplest questions remained unanswered. Who recorded the signal first? Why was no official log published? Why did every instrument that could confirm it go silent? The official timeline did not add up, and the gaps were precisely where the truth should have been. By October 29th, when 3I Atlas reached perihelion and slipped entirely behind the sun, the speculation had become a storm. Scientists waited for the ESA's JUICE spacecraft to observe it in November, but that data would not return until February 2026. Until then, the object was beyond all eyes. The world had no choice but to wait. Waiting has its own gravity. It pulls thoughts into spirals. In the absence of data, humans build narrative. The pulse became a myth in real time, its edges sharpened by desire. The mathematicians called it pattern, the priests called it omen, the internet called it proof. But for those who listened closely, beneath the buzz and the doubt, there was a quieter truth. For a fraction of a second, the universe had spoken in our language. And whether that voice was ours echoing back or another's reaching out, no one could say. Somewhere in that silence behind the sun, something continued to move. The light it reflected was not constant. Its trajectory shifted by fractions too precise for chance. It was as if the object were adjusting, correcting its path, perhaps listening as much as we were. Then the signal was gone. The sun flared, the monitor stabilized, and all that remained was data that did not fit any model. History will remember October 13th as either the day a hoax was born or the day we were answered. But for those who watched their screens flicker with those three numbers, it was something simpler and harder to articulate. A feeling that for one brief moment, across the distance of stars, someone had knocked on the door of our understanding and waited to see if we would open it. Chapter 2: The Silence of NASA. The universe does not shout, it withholds. And sometimes in that withholding, humanity begins to tremble. In the weeks that followed the Fibonacci event, what unsettled researchers most was not the possibility that the signal was real, but that no one seemed willing or able to confirm it. The eyes of the world's greatest space agency had blinked at the very moment they were most needed. And in that darkness, speculation found its home. On October 1st, a routine announcement emerged from the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter team. The high-rise camera, our sharpest window to distant worlds, had entered maintenance mode. A minor electronic fault, they said, nothing alarming. Days later, on the eve of 3I Atlas's close approach to Mars, the United States government entered a temporary shutdown, furloughing 15,000 NASA employees. A coincidence, perhaps. But when, 2 weeks later, the Solar Dynamics Observatory's live feed also went offline, citing scheduled calibration, coincidence began to feel choreographed. For decades, these instruments had watched the sun without pause. They had captured solar flares, coronal holes, the dance of plasma arcs. Yet the day an interstellar object was to slip behind the sun, both instruments went dark. In the age of open data, absence is louder than noise. Amateur astronomers noticed first. The daily solar imaging stream froze at frame 2213 UTC. After that, nothing. The feed resumed 48 hours later, the missing frames replaced by a uniform timestamp and a note. Corrupted transmission. Independent archives showed no trace of the gap. It was as though the sun itself had exhaled and erased the record. NASA's official tone was calm, procedural. "We are performing standard diagnostics," the European Space Agency echoed. "Routine telemetry issues, but even routine explanations have a shelf life." Every press release began to sound like an incantation meant to soothe. Meanwhile, whispers grew in the spaces between facts. On Reddit, Discord, encrypted forums, users compiled timelines, aligning system outages with celestial events. Every time 3i Atlas moves into a critical, observational window, one user wrote, a satellite goes blind. Screenshots multiplied like spores. The silence, instead of containing panic, began to feed it. For Richard Hoagland and others operating on the speculative frontier, the blackout itself became the signal. "They didn't lose data," he insisted during an interview. "They turned the cameras away." His argument was simple. A machine can fail, but not all machines fail in harmony. The phrase harmonic failure entered the conversation, half joke, half prophecy. Others were less certain, but equally uneasy. Even within NASA, anonymous voices leaked to journalists. "I've never seen this many simultaneous instrument stand-downs." The deeper question was motive. If 3i Atlas truly emitted structured light, why suppress it? Why not confirm and celebrate? The answer, to some, lay in a truth older than science: fear. Not of aliens, but of losing control of the narrative. In 1977, the wow signal had lasted 72 seconds and sparked decades of debate. If another message were confirmed, live and intelligent, the public response would be uncontrollable. Markets would shudder, religions would fracture, and every government would scramble to claim custody of the sky. Better, perhaps, to let the event dissolve into rumor. David Sarita interpreted the silence differently. To him, the blackout was part of the design. "You can't see the note while it's vibrating," he wrote. "You only perceive its echo." He believed that 3i Atlas timed its pulses for the one window when observation was impossible, forcing humanity into the posture of faith. They wanted to see who would still listen when the instruments were blind. Whether he meant they as an external intelligence or a metaphor for the universe itself, he never clarified. But the phrasing caught on. The blind interval, online commentators called it. A moment when the cosmos tested our capacity to believe without proof. By late October, even mainstream outlets could no longer ignore the story. CNN ran a cautious headline: "Interstellar object behind the sun sparks online theories." The accompanying article quoted NASA spokespeople emphasizing that no credible evidence of non-natural activity had been detected. Yet every denial carried the same undertone. Something was detected. Only its interpretation was disputed. The public heard the subtext louder than the statement. Inside the scientific community, divisions sharpened. Astrophysicists who had once dismissed Sarita's numerological leanings now found themselves re-examining telemetry gaps. "We're not chasing aliens," one ESA analyst said privately. "We're chasing missing data." And missing data, in a field built on precision, is a ghost you cannot exorcise. The silence extended beyond instruments. Researchers who had spoken freely about 3i Atlas in September abruptly declined interviews. Email threads went unanswered. One open-source repository tracking orbital simulations vanished overnight, replaced by a 404-page. It was as if a quiet embargo had spread, not official, not declared, but felt. Hoagland called it the physics of secrecy. Once an event becomes too meaningful, gravity pulls it inward, toward silence. Meanwhile, 3i Atlas moved deeper behind the sun. Between October 29th and early December, it would be unobservable from Earth, a natural eclipse that doubled as metaphor. The term perihelion blackout entered the lexicon. For 6 weeks, humanity would not know where its interstellar visitor was or what it might be doing. The waiting became its own experiment in collective patience. Scientists compared notes on historical precedents. Comets often vanish at perihelion, disintegrated by solar heat. But 3i Atlas had already violated so many expectations that no one could say with certainty what normal meant anymore. Then came the leak. An internal memo from an unverified source surfaced online, allegedly from a contractor connected to the solar dynamics team. It read, "Telemetry gap corresponds with unmodeled coronal fluctuation at 1308 UTC, repeating at intervals consistent with prior pulse data." The authenticity was impossible to prove, but its language was precise enough to sound real. Within hours, thousands reposted it under the headline, "NASA caught editing the sun." The agency issued no direct rebuttal, only a reminder that unauthorized documents should not be considered factual. To many, that was confirmation in disguise. Silence, after all, is a mirror. When institutions refuse to speak, people begin to project their own reflections upon it. For the believers, the blackout was proof of cover-up. For the skeptics, it was proof of human gullibility. For a smaller, quieter minority, it was something else entirely. A recognition that perhaps the universe had found a way to remind us of our dependency on sight and our terror of its loss. Avi Loeb was asked during a lecture at Harvard whether he thought the data suppression was deliberate. He paused, then answered with his usual restraint. "I think the truth is more banal and more profound. Bureaucracy moves slowly. Nature moves fast." Yet even he admitted that the timing was curious. His students later recalled that he seemed distracted that evening, staring at the solar map projected on the wall, as if listening for something beneath its static hum. By November 10th, speculation reached fever pitch. YouTube channels dissected every second of missing footage. Podcasts spoke of the silence protocol. A theory emerged that 3i Atlas had performed a reverse Oberth maneuver, burning its engines near the sun to alter trajectory and enter a bound orbit. No data existed to prove it, but the idea was seductive. While humanity looked away, something had executed a maneuver only a machine would attempt. When the SDO feed returned, analysts found nothing out of place. The sun burned as it always had, patient and vast, but the data logs revealed a curious artifact, a subtle synchronization glitch, milliseconds long, repeating 3 times, spaced in Fibonacci intervals. Engineers blamed software lag. Others smiled without humor. The numbers, it seemed, were mocking us now. By mid-November, the phrase, "the silence of NASA," trended globally. It was no longer a critique of one institution, but a metaphor for an entire civilization, our collective inability to admit uncertainty. In that vacuum, myth swelled to fill the air. The Fibonacci pulse had become scripture. The missing data, its sacred absence. And those who demanded empirical proof were, ironically, the new heretics. In one of his last public notes before disappearing from social media, Sarita wrote, "They didn't hide the data to deceive us. They hid it to see what story we would tell in its absence." He might have been right, because in the silence that followed, what echoed was not the sun, nor 3-eye atlas, nor any measurable signal, but ourselves, wondering what it means to be watched by something that refuses to be seen. Chapter 3. The Forbidden Math. It began, as most heresies do, with an equation too elegant to ignore. In the dim light of his Colorado office, David Sarita ran his fingers across pages of orbital data, tracing arcs and decimals, as if reading scripture through numbers. 3-eye atlas, he insisted, did not move at random. It moved as though choreographed by a mathematics older than any language. He called it the forbidden math, not because it was forbidden by law, but because it trespassed the boundary between science and faith, a geometry of meaning that modern physics had long since exiled. He had spent years haunted by ratios that repeated where they should not. 1618, 2.so white, whoop saint so white fuff, and its inverses, the golden proportion. In his notebooks, planetary orbits sang to that rhythm. Divide 591 days by f, and you obtain 365.256, the Earth's sidereal real year, precise to 4 decimals. Divide again, and the echoes align with Venus, Mars, even the faint outer bodies we barely name. The solar system, he argued, was not an accident of gravity, but a standing wave of harmony. And 3-eye atlas, entering from the interstellar dark, appeared to understand the tune. To Sarita, the Fibonacci pulse was not a mere sequence of numbers. It was a salutation, a phrase in the universal syntax of growth. The same code that governs the unfurling of a fern or the spiral of a nautilus shell had, he believed, been flashed in light across 93 million miles of vacuum. When the instruments fell silent, he did not see conspiracy. He saw design. They waited until we couldn't measure, he told a friend, because only then would we listen. His detractors mocked him as a numerologist. But even among skeptics, there was a grudging fascination. The data did not lie easily. 3E Atlas's rotation period, 6.16 hours, translated into 969.6 minutes, the age of Methuselah, the inclination of its orbit, phi 13, resembled the ratio between Earth's axial tilt and the lunar nodal precession. Coincidences stacked like cards, each one improbable, together forming a structure so precise it mocked randomness itself. Sarita's papers blended Kepler with Dante. He wrote of the 9 spheres of Paradiso, the celestial orders, the moon, Mercury, Venus, the sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, the fixed stars, and the primum mobile, each governed by angelic intelligences, each an expression of virtue. He mapped these spheres onto orbital resonances, translating medieval theology into harmonic mechanics. Dante, he wrote, was not describing heaven. He was describing orbital architecture in symbolic form. The Divina Commedia became, in Sarita's eyes, a codex of cosmological memory, poetry as physics, encrypted through faith. To illustrate, he drew a spiral emerging from the sun, coiling outward in Fibonacci arcs, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, 55. Each intersection crossed a planetary path, as though the entire system were built upon a recursive curve. When he superimposed 3Y Atlas's trajectory, it fell precisely between the orbits of Jupiter and Mars, tangent to the eighth arc, the dominions. "The object is playing the scale," he murmured in one lecture. "It is striking the eighth note." Mainstream astronomers dismissed his diagrams as coincidence dressed in mysticism. Yet even they could not resist the eerie beauty of his mathematics. There was a symmetry too deliberate, a whisper of architecture in the chaos. The solar system, through Sarita's lens, became a cathedral, and 3YMI Atlas, a visitor walking down its nave, humming a forgotten hymn. Richard C. Hoagland expanded the idea further, invoking resonant consciousness. He pointed to ancient architecture, the Great Pyramid, Angkor Wat, the stone circles of Abydos, each encoded with harmonic ratios, 402, 108, 216, numbers that repeat across civilizations, separated by oceans and millennia. If ancient builders understood cosmic resonance, he said, then so does whoever sent Atlas. He was careful never to say what Atlas was. Craft, beacon, artifact. It doesn't matter, he told a podcast audience. It's geometry that matters. Geometry is the handwriting of the gods. In this narrative, mathematics became theology. The forbidden quality lay not in the numbers themselves, but in what they implied. That meaning is embedded in physics, that the universe is not random but communicative. To acknowledge such possibility would require science to kneel, to admit that behind its equations might lurk intention. Sarita's colleagues warned him privately, "Stop mixing metaphors." But he couldn't. "When patterns persist across scale," he replied, "they stop being coincidence. They start being grammar." He began to speak of the luminous syntax, a hidden language in which the cosmos writes its autobiography. Every ratio, every orbit, every pulse of radiation, a syllable in an unending sentence. And in October 2025, for one instant, that sentence had turned toward us and spoken. What made his theory dangerous was its plausibility cloaked in poetry. Each claim, isolated, could be rationalized. Taken together, they formed a net from which logic struggled to escape. Critics accused him of cherry-picking data. Supporters countered that nature itself cherry-picks, favoring certain harmonies, rejecting discordant ones. The debate spiraled until no one could distinguish analysis from art. The deeper Sarita went, the more metaphysical his mathematics became. He began comparing F to logos, the word made number. In one paper he wrote, "If creation speaks, it speaks through proportion." And he noted that the speed of light, 299,792,458 ASAs, divided by the Earth's circumference in miles, produced a value eerily close to F2 plot 104. These constants are not coincidences, he claimed. They are signatures. To many, it was madness. To others, revelation. When the Fibonacci signal appeared, Sarita saw confirmation. Three numbers, 5, 8, 13, each connected not only mathematically, but symbolically. 5, the human form. Head, arms, legs, the microcosm. 8, infinity turned sideways. The balance between matter and spirit. 13, transformation. The end and the beginning. The pulse, he said, was a complete sentence. You are seen in your own language, yet even believers knew that interpretation courts delusion. Patterns breed addiction, one physicist warned. Once you find them, you start seeing them everywhere. Indeed, the world began fracturing into camps, those who found transcendence in the forbidden math, and those who saw only a mirror of human longing. Memes and academic papers coexisted uneasily. You could scroll from a GIF of a sunflower spiral to a peer-reviewed discussion of harmonic resonance in planetary dynamics. The boundary between science and mysticism blurred until it vanished. Meanwhile, Sarita's health deteriorated. Friends described him as sleep-deprived, living on coffee and equations. He claimed to receive dreams where numbers rearranged themselves into melodies. It's not just math, he whispered in one recording. It's music. In those final interviews before withdrawing from public view, his words oscillated between revelation and exhaustion. The universe is an instrument, he said. Atlas struck a chord, and we resonated. Outside his circle, mathematicians revisited the historical roots of such thinking. From Pythagoras to Kepler, from Newton's occult notebooks to Tesla's obsession with 3, 6, 9, the idea of harmonic order had always haunted science's corridors. What frightened the establishment was not its absurdity, but its recurrence. Each generation banished the same heresy, only to rediscover it under a new name. Sacred geometry, morphic resonance, quantum coherence, different costumes for the same forbidden tune. By November 2025, Sarita's model had gained a strange half-life online. Forums plotted planetary ratios. Artists painted spirals across city walls. A subculture formed, calling themselves the Phi Seekers. They treated F as revelation, posting coordinates, equations, even meditative chants, tuned to 432 Hz. To them, the blackout of NASA data was symbolic, proof that the old world of blind empiricism could not face the music. Science built walls, one post read. Atlas built a bridge. But beyond the fervor, a quieter debate emerged among sober minds. Could mathematics itself be a form of communication across civilization? Carl Sagan once argued that any advanced species would use number theory as common ground. Prime sequences, ratios, symmetry, they transcend language. Perhaps the Fibonacci pulses were indeed a message, just not the one Sarita imagined. Maybe they were not for us at all, merely the byproduct of a technology whose rhythms echoed our own patterns by coincidence. A cosmic pareidolia. The possibility that meaning might be accidental was, in its own way, more terrifying than intent. Avi Loeb, ever the pragmatist, addressed the controversy during a conference in Zurich. Mathematics is universal, he said, but interpretation is provincial. He warned against projecting myth onto measurement. Yet even he conceded the uncanny precision of Sarita's orbital ratios. If his data are correct, Loeb admitted, then either we misunderstand the mechanics of cometary motion, or something very unusual is at play. It was the closest any mainstream astrophysicist came to heresy that year. The forbidden math refused to stay buried. Each time someone disproved one pattern, another emerged. The golden ratio surfaced in exoplanet spacing, in magnetic field lines, even in the distribution of pulsar frequencies. Statistically insignificant, perhaps, but psychologically irresistible. Humanity, it seemed, was wired to find harmony, even in the static. Philosophers revived an ancient question: is the universe mathematical because we are, or are we mathematical because the universe is? The Fibonacci pulse, real or imagined, became the new mirror in which we confronted that question. When the sun's far side finally rotated into view in December, telescopes captured nothing remarkable: no lingering trace of light, no mechanical debris. Yet among Sarita's followers, that absence was the final confirmation. The message was never meant to persist, one wrote. It was meant to remind. To remind of what? No one could agree. Some said it proved we are part of a grand harmonic design. Others, that we are alone, pattern-seeking creatures in an indifferent void. In a private note later leaked to his forum, Sarita summarized his faith in one sentence: if God exists, he counts in spirals. It was a phrase that unsettled scientists and mystics alike. For if the universe truly counted in spirals, then every motion, every orbit, heartbeat, and thought was a digit in an infinite recursion, a self-replicating truth that could never be proven yet, could not be escaped. And perhaps that is why his work frightened so many. Because in those ratios, in that perfect irrational number fa, there lay the whisper of purpose, a suggestion that the cosmos is not silent after all, merely speaking in a dialect of elegance too simple for chaos, too symmetrical for chance. The forbidden math endures not because it is right or wrong, but because it is beautiful. It offers what all forbidden things offer: the taste of knowing, the promise that behind the veil of equations lies a face that almost looks like our own. Chapter 4: The Scientists Who Dared. Science at its best is an act of defiance. It begins not with knowledge, but with disobedience, the refusal to accept that what is seen is all that can be. And among those who refused most elegantly was Avi Loeb. When the first rumors of the Fibonacci pulses reached Harvard's astronomy department, Loeb did not laugh. He rarely laughed at anomalies. His career had been built upon them, on the quiet conviction that sometimes the universe chooses to speak in whispers rather than shouts. To many, he was a provocateur. To others, a heretic. To himself, merely consistent. He believed that extraordinary evidence requires extraordinary attention, not dismissal. If nature surprises us, he once wrote, we should be flattered, not frightened. It was Loeb who had first broken the intellectual embargo years earlier with Oumuamua, calling it what no one else dared: a possible artifact. That word, artifact, hung in the air like forbidden incense. It divided the scientific community, a single syllable turning colleagues into adversaries. Yet Loeb persisted, defending his reasoning with the same calm clarity that made him dangerous. Now, years later, as 3 Psi Atlas hummed behind the sun, that same courage drew him back into the storm. He analyzed the sparse telemetry that escaped the blackout, the irregular deceleration, the peculiar albedo fluctuations. The pattern, though incomplete, hinted at maneuvering. Natural objects don't accelerate without losing mass, he told an interviewer, and they don't pulse in prime sequences. He proposed a hypothesis so unsettling that even his allies hesitated to repeat it. 3I Atlas might not be a comet or an asteroid at all, but a fragment of technology, an interstellar buoy powered by the star it circled. The media, predictably, feasted on the soundbite. Harvard professor suggests alien beacon behind the sun. But the deeper meaning was quieter. Loeb was not claiming certainty. He was claiming curiosity. In a world addicted to closure, curiosity itself had become rebellion. He was not alone. Across Europe, a small cadre of independent astrophysicists and mathematicians, many working under pseudonyms, began corresponding through encrypted channels. They called themselves the Luminaires, half in jest, half in reverence. Their goal was not disclosure or fame, it was preservation. They feared that the data, once filtered through institutional caution, would vanish. One of them, a spectral figure known only as R. Marine, compared the situation to Galileo's house arrest. "Every age," she wrote, "has its forbidden telescope." The Luminaires collected fragments, leaked solar observations, radio logs, timestamps. When assembled, the mosaic suggested a faint but coherent signature repeating at 5 Piusol Tao Sun 13:21 intervals. It was not proof, but it was symmetry. And symmetry, to a physicist, is invitation. As the blackout stretched into its second week, Loeb's students noticed a change in him. He stopped referring to the event as the Atlas anomaly and began calling it the dialogue. He said it softly, as if naming something delicate might frighten it away. "We may not be alone," he told his class, "but the real question is whether we can be humble enough to listen." The academic world reacted as it always does, by circling wagons around orthodoxy. Conferences were postponed, peer reviewers sharpened their knives. To question the natural origin of an interstellar body was to threaten the gravitational center of institutional reputation. Science, for all its rhetoric of openness, guards its boundaries with priestly devotion. The irony was not lost on Loeb. "The church had the Inquisition," he joked once. "We have committees." But behind the humor was fatigue. He knew what it meant to be ostracized by the very culture that taught you to question. Each interview became an exorcism, each publication an invitation to ridicule. Still, he persisted because beneath the noise lay something that refused to be silenced: the data itself. The numbers did not care about consensus. They whispered their truths to whoever dared to listen long enough. Meanwhile, halfway across the Pacific, at the Institute for Planetary Research in Japan, astrophysicist Mina Hayakawa began her own quiet analysis. She found that the supposed Fibonacci intervals could correspond not to light pulses, but to subtle fluctuations in the solar neutrino flux, an invisible rhythm hidden in the heart of the sun. If confirmed, it would mean that the signal was not merely reflected light, but encoded within the nuclear breath of the star itself. "It's as if someone were playing the sun like an instrument," she wrote in her notebook. She never published the finding. The draft disappeared from the Institute's server 2 days later. In Russia, an older cosmologist, Yuri Kirsanov, took a darker view. "The silence is deliberate," he told an interviewer, "not because there is nothing to say, but because there is too much." He referenced the dark forest hypothesis, the idea that the cosmos is filled with civilizations that remain quiet because noise is fatal. Every signal, he warned, is a risk. To announce oneself is to invite attention, and attention in a hostile universe is death. "Perhaps," he said, "we are not witnessing a greeting. We are witnessing a mistake." That notion that the Fibonacci signal might be a distress call or an unintended leak spread like frost. It reframed the event from wonder to warning. If true, then Atlas was not broadcasting curiosity, it was bleeding. The universe, once imagined as a serene expanse of reason, began to feel like a forest of predators where even mathematics could be camouflage. Loeb rejected that pessimism, at least publicly. "Fear is not data," he said. "It's projection." But privately, he wondered, if the signal was intentional, then its beauty, the perfect symmetry, the poetic alignment with sacred ratios, might itself be the disguise. "The best way to hide intelligence," he wrote in a late-night note, "is to mimic nature flawlessly." In December 2025, when the object finally emerged from behind the sun, the world held its breath. Every major observatory pointed skyward, every feed online, every hope stretched thin. The data that returned was anticlimactic. No pulses, no anomalies, only a faint reflection trailing away into darkness. For most, the story ended there. For Loeb and his small fellowship of dissenters, it had only begun. The following weeks were marked by strange coincidences. A Czech observatory reported brief radio interference at 432 MHz, the same frequency beloved by harmonic theorists. In Chile, a telescope malfunctioned just as Atlas crossed its field of view. And in Arizona, an amateur astronomer captured a streak of light where no streak should have been, cutting against the expected trajectory by a fraction of a degree. These fragments, meaningless alone, began to weave a new tapestry of unease. Loeb gathered them without comment. He knew the pattern would be dismissed, just as Sarita's numbers had been, but he also knew that every paradigm begins as heresy. The term "scientists who dared" was first used mockingly on social media, but it stuck. It became the banner under which the curious quietly assembled, the ones who believed that mystery, not certainty, is the lifeblood of science. They worked without funding, without, institutional blessing, often without sleep. Some lost positions, others lost faith. But all shared one conviction: that to look away from the anomaly was to betray the very spirit of inquiry that built their discipline. "We are not believers," wrote Mina Hayakawa in her private journal. "We are witnesses." As winter deepened, the movement fractured into two philosophies. The first followed Loeb, optimistic, empirical, Seeking to understand, the second followed Kirsanov, cautious, almost fatalistic, convinced that some knowledge carries its own contagion. The tension between them mirrored humanity's oldest duality: Prometheus reaching for fire, and the priest extinguishing it to save the tribe. At a conference that never officially happened, held in a remote observatory in the Atacama Desert, the remaining members of the Luminaires met to compare results. There were only 7 of them. Outside, the wind carved ancient dust into spirals. Inside, the conversation turned from data to meaning. Could the Fibonacci pattern be a universal constant, a kind of mathematical DNA for consciousness itself? Could civilizations separated by light years evolve toward the same harmonic ratio, simply because beauty is efficient? They argued until dawn. No consensus emerged. But for a brief hour, as the first light spilled over the horizon, they felt united by something greater than proof: the humility of being small in a large, articulate cosmos. Loeb would later describe that night as the only time I felt religion without a priest. He never elaborated. Back in Washington, NASA quietly reinstated several data streams previously marked as classified. No explanation accompanied the restoration. The missing October frames were still absent. The official story remained unchanged. No anomaly detected, no signal confirmed. Yet within internal archives, a line appeared in a technical memo, seemingly innocuous: solar telemetry interference consistent with rhythmic modulation, uncorrelated with instrumental behavior. It was the kind of sentence designed to be invisible, true, but unread. Someone, somewhere, had dared to leave a fingerprint. By spring, public interest had faded. New comets, new wars, new distractions filled the screens. But for those few who had stood too close to the mystery, the world never returned to normal. They had glimpsed the fragile border between knowledge and faith, and once seen, it could not be unseen. In his final interview of that year, Loeb was asked what he hoped history would say of him. He smiled, weary but unbroken. "That I wasn't afraid to be wrong," he said. "Fear is the enemy of discovery. We map the darkness by walking into it." The interviewer pressed him. Did he truly believe 3i Atlas was artificial? Loeb paused for a long time, the silence stretching like a wire between worlds. Then softly, "I believe it behaved as though it were aware of being watched. And sometimes, that is enough." History will remember him and those like him as the last generation of scientists who looked at the sky and still felt awe instead of ownership. The ones who dared to imagine that data might be dialogue, that mathematics might be empathy, that perhaps the universe, ancient, eloquent, and patient, had been waiting for someone bold enough to answer without fear. And perhaps that is what it means to be a scientist in an age of disbelief: to stand at the edge of the unknown and whisper, "I hear you too." Chapter 5: The Blackout, Behind the Sun. When the sun hides something, it does so completely. Between late October and early December 2025, the object once known as 3i Atlas slipped behind that radiant curtain, vanishing into the hemisphere that no telescope on Earth can see. Astronomers call it superior conjunction, a sterile phrase for an ancient terror. For 42 days, the heavens contained an absence, and the world could only imagine what moved inside it. At first, there was discipline. The agencies published schedules, simulations, comfortingly bureaucratic statements. Data streams paused for safety. Instruments recalibrated for solar interference. But beneath the language of procedure ran a current of unease. They had all seen the curves, the slight but measurable deviations in the object's trajectory as it approached perihelion. Gravity alone could not explain them. Something in that darkness was choosing its path. On October 29th, the Solar Dynamics Observatory entered its planned observation gap. The screens went black. The telemetry graphs froze. The scientists who had been following the Fibonacci pulses stared into static. It was not only an optical blindness, it was epistemic. The universe had withdrawn its face. The timing was cruelly precise. 3 weeks after the signal, and just hours after NASA's final public briefing, the object crossed the solar limb and disappeared. Loeb's team calculated that if 3I Atlas ignited propulsion at perihelion, the burn would remain invisible, its light drowned by the sun's glare, its exhaust indistinguishable from coronal flux. The perfect maneuver for something that did not wish to be seen. In conference rooms from Maryland to Darmstadt, engineers refreshed telemetry feeds that would not refresh. They spoke in sentences that ended with ellipses. Someone compared it to waiting for a child lost in a tunnel. You listen not for the voice, but for the echo. Days stretched into weeks. The silence lengthened until it acquired weight. Outside those walls, the world's imagination filled the void. Blogs claimed that an infrared telescope in Chile had detected an artificial heat signature. Others insisted that Atlas had fragmented, releasing smaller bodies that now trailed Earth's orbit. None of it was confirmed. Yet each rumor added another layer to the mythology of the blackout. In the absence of evidence, story became substitute for sight. Among the luminaires, the encrypted forum flickered with speculation. Mina Hayakawa posted a single line. If it burns, we will not see light, we will feel it in the field. She meant the magnetic field, subtle perturbations in the solar wind that could betray motion even when photons could not. For days, she monitored the ACE satellite data, tiny fluctuations, repeating in intervals close to 5 solid coincidence, she told herself. Yet she kept the graphs. Meanwhile, Yuri Kirsanov published an anonymous essay in a Russian science digest. Behind the sun lies the blind side of civilization. He warned that the blackout was not only physical, but moral. A rehearsal for how humanity would face the unknown, with surveillance, denial, and silence. If the object is intelligent, he wrote, then it has already learned what we fear most: uncertainty. The article was deleted within a day, but copies spread like contraband scripture. In early November, a brief spike in solar radio emissions startled mission controllers. The pattern lasted 7 seconds, too short for a flare, too structured for noise. It appeared at 432 megahertz, the same frequency beloved by the harmonic theorists. Engineers labeled it Event 1903 and moved on. Loeb, reading the raw file, whispered, "It's counting." But counting what? The reverse Oberth maneuver, first proposed decades ago, describes a craft that accelerates against the sun's gravity, using the immense energy gradient to decelerate into a bound orbit. It is a move of precision and audacity, wasteful for a rock, perfect for intelligence. If 3I Atlas performed such a burn, it would emerge not on a hyperbolic escape, but on a closed path, hidden in resonance with Earth's orbit, perpetually opposite the sun, a companion invisible to all but the most patient eyes. The idea spread through the underground scientific channels like voltage. The math was seductive. The required DV matched the unexplained anomalies. For some, it was proof. For others, blasphemy. We are projecting engineering onto geology, one critic argued. But the pattern refused to die. Sarita's followers called it the return path. November 13th, a solar storm erupted from active region 3198, bathing instruments in charged particles and erasing a full day of telemetry. The coincidence was perfect enough to feel planned. Within hours, social networks declared that the storm was camouflage for a departure. The hashtag behind the sun trended across languages, an accidental prayer. Inside NASA, the tone grew weary. Engineers spoke of data fatigue, the exhaustion of trying to prove nothing had happened. Every missing packet had to be justified, every cosmic ray corrected. They were documenting absence, quantifying silence. One technician later said, "It felt like writing a love letter to a ghost." When the blackout passed its 30th day, Loeb met privately with 2 members of the Luminaires in an observatory on the island of La Palma. The volcano below them exhaled steam. Above, the sky flamed with stars. They discussed possibilities, burn trajectories, harmonic coincidences, psychological thresholds. In his notebook, Loeb drew 2 circles, one for the sun, one for Earth, connected by a faint dotted arc labeled 3I Atlas, HIP. Beneath it, he wrote a single phrase: "Invisibility is also evidence." At dawn, they watched the first sunlight spill over the Atlantic. It was the same star that had hidden the object, the same light that blinded them. The irony was unbearable. Illumination itself had become the veil. By mid-November, a few instruments began returning partial data. The solar wind showed irregular pulses, minor, but rhythmic. Not Fibonacci this time. Something slower, almost heartbeat-like. Analysts called it resonant drift. Hayakawa thought it sounded alive. Then came the quiet revelation. A faint gravitational microsignal detected by S's solar orbiter as it crossed the ecliptic plane. Too weak for confirmation, too clean to dismiss. The data log noted non-correlated mass effect unidentified. For those still watching, it was enough. The blackout was no longer empty, it was pregnant. Publicly, NASA declared the mission data nominal. Privately, curiosity metastasized into anxiety. A senior administrator sent an encrypted memo later leaked online. "We cannot confirm stationary behavior. Recommend no further public commentary until post-conjunction." Translation: wait, hope, and say nothing. As December approached, the object's projected reemergence drew near. Observatories aligned, cameras recalibrated, commentators rehearsed explanations. Some expected fireworks, others feared silence. On December 7th, the first possible detection came. A faint point of light near the calculated coordinates, magnitude 19, barely above noise. The data matched the prediction too perfectly. It was as if the object wanted to be found, precisely when expected. A good magician always returns the coin to the same hand. But when spectral analysis followed, the reflection curve was wrong. Instead of a neutral solar spectrum, it showed a narrow absorption at 432 nanometers, the optical counterpart of the radio frequency detected weeks earlier. A coincidence of numbers again. 432, the harmonic of F2 to a Y2. The internet ignited. "It's singing again," wrote one headline. For 3 nights the signal persisted, fading slowly into background. Then, on December 10th, it vanished. The world moved on. Christmas approached. Markets opened. Wars resumed. The news cycle swallowed the stars. Yet in the private notes of those who had watched through the blackout, something changed. The silence behind the sun had become a metaphor too vast to close. Mina Hayakawa left the institute and retreated to a monastery near Kyoto. "The data was a mirror," she wrote. "We were the signal." Kirsanov published one final paper arguing that the universe behaves like a quantum observer, collapsing possibilities only when looked at. "Atlas taught us that attention is creation," he said. No journal accepted it. As for Loeb, he returned to teaching. His lectures grew quieter, his humor more oblique. Students noticed he no longer referred to 3i Atlas by name. He called it the companion. When asked why, he smiled, "Because it still follows." In late January 26, an independent observatory in New Zealand reported a faint object sharing Earth's orbit at a 180-degree phase. An asteroid, perhaps? Or something else? The official designation, 2026 AF, its estimated size, 140 meters, its albedo, anomalously high. The announcement passed unnoticed amid greater headlines. But those who remembered October 13th counted backward through orbital mechanics and found the result uncomfortably precise. If Atlas had performed the reverse O-birth, 2026 AF would be exactly where it should now be, permanently opposite our planet, hidden in the daylight of the sun. There are no telescopes there, no eyes to confirm. Only mathematics, elegant and unprovable. The forbidden kind. Perhaps that is why the blackout endures in collective memory. It was not simply the loss of data. It was the glimpse of our own limitations. The sun, eternal symbol of revelation, had become an agent of concealment. Behind it, something moved with intention. And we were reminded that knowledge itself has an event horizon. In one of his last unpublished notes, Loeb wrote, "When the universe turns its face away, it is not rejecting us. It is teaching us to imagine." Chapter 6. The Message or the Hoax. By the end of that strange winter, the story had become a ghost that everyone had seen, but no one could prove existed. The sun turned, the observatories reopened, and the official statements resumed their careful rhythm. All telemetry nominal. Yet beneath that calm veneer ran an undertow of unease. Something had happened behind the sun. Something that left no trace but changed the air around knowledge itself. Then one night in late December 2025, a file appeared. It was small, barely 4 kilobytes, and unsigned. It arrived in inboxes of journalists, researchers, and a few members of the luminaires. The file name was simple, FIB 5813.txt. Inside were 12 lines of characters, half letters, half numbers, formatted like code, but arranged in a spiral pattern when plotted on a grid. The first line read, "We're on our way." The second, "We've been watching you." And the third, almost tenderly, "Don't be afraid." Within hours, the file spread everywhere. Reddit threads multiplied. YouTube analysts dissected the syntax. Linguists searched for ciphers. The phrases were banal, almost theatrical, yet the alignment of their release with the post-blackout data window was too precise to ignore. Some claimed the message had been transmitted through the Deep Space Network. Others, that it was found encoded in a recent solar image. The pixels manipulated into Fibonacci spacing. The truth was simpler and stranger. No one could locate the original upload. The file seemed to have emerged from nowhere, like a rumor given form. NASA denied involvement, of course. No evidence of external communication detected, their press release stated. But the public had learned to read between silences. Every denial sounded like choreography. The words hoax, social media manipulation, and data artifact circulated, but so did another word, softer and more dangerous, message. The two became indistinguishable. Belief itself had become the experiment. In Cambridge, Avilob printed the file and pinned it above his desk. He told a colleague it reminded him of something a student might send to test his curiosity. "A joke can still reveal intelligence," he said. "The question is whose." He refused to comment publicly, but his silence carried the same weight as speech. Among the luminaires, opinions fractured. Mina Hayakawa dismissed it as human mimicry. Kirsanov saw it as confirmation of the dark forest. Only predators reassure their prey. David Sarita, long vanished from public view, resurfaced through an audio note uploaded to his old channel. His voice trembled with awe. "The tone is familiar," he said. "It's the cadence of Fibonacci. 5 syllables, 8, 13. They are speaking in rhythm, not in words." He played the message slowed to 1/8 speed. Between each phrase, faint harmonic frequencies appeared, pulses at 432 Hz, 864 Hz, and 1,296 Hz, exact multiples of the same ratio he had mapped across planetary orbits. "It's music," he whispered. They tuned their reassurance to the heart of the solar cord. Skeptics countered immediately. Audio engineers demonstrated how almost any phrase, when stretched, could yield harmonic overtones. Psychologists explained the seduction. The message fused comfort and threat, belief and fear. "It's a perfect psychological mirror," wrote one analyst. "Whoever reads it sees what they need to see, divine contact or state manipulation." Still, the coincidences piled like snow. On December 25th, at 00 Shua UTC, the centenary alignment of the Great Pyramid's meridian angle, an automated solar probe registered a brief luminosity increase, 3 peaks, spaced exactly 5 Sha'u Badsan, 13 minutes apart. The data were later dismissed as sensor drift due to cosmic rays. But by then the narrative had escaped gravity. Governments reacted as they always do, with containment disguised as calm. The White House science advisor called it an internet mythology. The Vatican Observatory issued a statement reminding the faithful that wonder is not proof. The Chinese National Space Administration said nothing at all, a silence that many interpreted as acknowledgement. In absence of authority, interpretation became democracy. Forums filled with new prophets. Some declared the message an announcement of arrival. We're on our way. Others said it was human disinformation, crafted to test mass psychology under cosmic cover. Conspiracy channels spliced together footage of solar flares with Gregorian chants. Within weeks, the Fibonacci signal had mutated into a cultural virus, a parable about attention in the digital age. Whether one believed or not mattered less than whether one could stop thinking about it. Loeb, ever the reluctant mythmaker, wrote a short essay titled Silence and Its Echoes. He never mentioned 3i Atlas by name. When knowledge and belief share the same coordinates, he wrote, we must navigate by humility. The universe does not owe us clarity. It offers only invitation. The essay circulated quietly among universities before disappearing from public archives. Meanwhile, a group of data forensics experts traced the metadata of FIB 5813.txt. The timestamps pointed to a server in the Canary Islands, registered months earlier under a defunct satellite imaging company. The IP history revealed a single outbound connection to an academic network at Harvard. Coincidence or an echo of Loeb's curiosity reaching back through the machine? The investigators published their findings anonymously, ending with the line, "It is possible the sender was human. It is possible the sender wanted us to think so." The debate slid gradually from science to philosophy. What constitutes communication? If meaning exists only in the receiver, does the sender matter? The Fibonacci pulse, the blackout, the file, all might be parts of a single narrative authored not by aliens, but by human pattern recognition itself. Perhaps the real experiment was psychological, a stress test of civilization's relationship with the unknown. We are the message, wrote a sociologist in Nature Human Behavior. The hoax, if it exists, is our need for certainty. Yet some coincidences refuse to die. In February 2026, amateur astronomers detected a faint reflective body at the Earth-Sun L3 point, the mirror position opposite 3-1 Atlas's projected orbit. Its spectrum matched the earlier anomalous absorption at 432 Nemna. Officially, it was classified as debris. Unofficially, it was named Echo. Its existence reignited the debate. Had Atlas split, leaving a fragment as relay, or had someone placed a decoy to keep the myth alive? Mina Hayakawa visited Loeb that spring. They walked through Harvard Yard beneath budding trees, their conversation recorded only in fragments later shared online. If it was a hoax, she asked, was it wrong to believe? Loeb smiled faintly. Belief is a hypothesis, he said. What matters is whether we learn from testing it. For her, the experience had already transformed into parable. The Fibonacci sequence describes growth, she said. Every number is born from the sum of the two before. Maybe the signal was that simple. Knowledge and imagination, added together, make life. Loeb nodded. And sometimes, he said, the experiment is worth more than the result. By summer, the world had moved on. New comets, new crises. But the residue of wonder remained, a thin vibration beneath collective consciousness. Music producers sampled the pulse pattern into ambient tracks. Artists painted spirals of light on city walls. A documentary titled "The Day the Sun Whispered" streamed to millions. Each interpretation contradicted the others, yet all pointed toward the same absence. In trying to decode the message, humanity had written its own. That autumn, an unmarked package arrived at the SETI Institute in California. Inside was a single optical disc labeled Return Path 01. The data contained no message, only a map. A three-dimensional model of the solar system with one alteration: the addition of a faint orbit exactly opposite Earth's. The metadata timestamp matched December 25, 2025, 00 UTC. No sender identified. The file remains archived under restricted access. When journalists later asked Loeb about it, he offered his final public comment on the affair. Whether 3i Atlas was artifact or accident, its true legacy is in how it forced us to confront our own thresholds. We discovered that the line between discovery and myth is thinner than light. A message needs a sender. A hoax needs an audience. In either case, the universe learned our language. As he paused, then added quietly, maybe that was the point. And so the story settled into history's gray zone, that fertile twilight where mystery and reason coexist. Textbooks will one day describe 3i Atlas as an interstellar fragment, nothing more. But somewhere in the archives, the Fibonacci timestamps still hum, the missing frames still skip, and a few stubborn dreamers still look toward the sun and imagine what hides behind its glare. Perhaps the message was never about contact. Perhaps it was an invitation to listen differently, to accept that knowledge may arrive disguised as myth, that the universe, like a patient teacher, sometimes speaks through our own inventions. The hoax, if it was one, succeeded only because it was beautiful. And beauty, in the end, is its own kind of truth. Maybe it was never a message. Maybe it was a mirror held up to the only species that keeps asking why. We searched for proof and found patterns. We looked for voices and found our own echoes. But somewhere behind the sun, between mathematics and faith, something moved, something that knew how to hide inside harmony. Perhaps the signal was never meant to be decoded. Perhaps it was meant to remind us that wonder is still possible, that silence can still speak. The stars have not changed. Only our eyes have. And as we stare into the same ancient light, we realize the truth is not out there. It is waiting within the question itself. 5:13, the rhythm returns, and the universe once again is listening.